Singapore, the richest country in Asia, the country that has achieved economic prosperity for its citizens in record time. How did they do it? And most importantly, can we do the same in Latin America? This is the only country that has become a rich country in just 70 years. The population of Singapore was poor, marginalized, with addictions, with venereal diseases, without legal status, sick, illiterate. Singapore had the highest percentage of its population living in absolute poverty and marginalization in the world. And in just 70 years, they became one of the most educated, healthiest, and wealthiest countries on planet Earth. How? How did they do it? Singapore went from being a cesspool of misery to one of the most developed, healthy, and happy countries that have ever existed on Earth. How did they do it? Let's look at all the details. The secret of Singapore is very simple. Two things: productivity and ethics. And by having these two elements, inevitably, as a natural consequence, it stops being a muddy swamp full of filth and becomes this. The safest city for tourists in the world. And from the moment you arrive, do you realize why? And the surprise you didn't know about. All of this was achieved thanks to a dictatorship. That's right, a dictatorship. That's why it was called the most successful dictatorship in the world. And I would say the only dictatorship that has truly worked in history. Now, is this a good thing? Does it make up for it? Was this a good dictator? There is no such thing as a good dictator, but a dictator can produce good outcomes. Hold that thought right there. Let's continue with the video. Let's start from the beginning. Some say that Singapore's success was pure coincidence, but that's not true. From tragedy and ashes, they built a mega empire. Singapore used to be a marginalized backwater. They were controlled by the British Empire and things went very badly for them. Then came the Japanese Empire and things got even worse. They were treated very badly. After World War II, it wasn't just a marginalized backwater. What little they had was destroyed, so the people dreamed of joining Malaysia. That's how bad things were for them. Imagine your country is so devastated that your dream is to join another country as your only option to survive and not starve because you have no faith in your future. Look, no matter how messed up a country or an area is, I feel like at least the general population has faith that someday in the future they'll be able to improve. In Singapore, they didn't even have this, not even faith. So with no dignity as a people, they begged Malaysia to accept them, to adopt them, like they were begging for citizenship. But the president of Malaysia was elected on the promise that he would put Malaysians first, the natives first. Then Malaysians, and after that all the other immigrants. Well, here in Singapore, 60% of the population was Chinese. So there you could already see the conflict. They said, these Chinese people are never going to vote the way we want them to vote. We can see something similar in Mexico, in the state of Mexico. They have always voted for the PRI. They have been PRI supporters from the beginning. It doesn't matter how much misery, poverty, or insecurity they have. One day Mexico could say, hey, what if we take the state of Mexico out of Mexico? If we kick them out of the Mexican Republic, expel them from our political territory so their votes don't affect us? Well, yes, and that's what they did here. They expelled Singapore because they assumed they wouldn't vote for their candidate. And so the Malaysian parliament votes unanimously to expel Singapore from its political territory. Normally, countries celebrate their independence. They don't regret it or try to avoid it. And countries hold on tightly to their colonies and territories. Look at the Falkland Islands with Argentina and the United Kingdom, the colonies that France has, and so on. Well, here the exact opposite happened. Especially a country with such a strategic location as Singapore. This is a key route for imports around the world. The entire export industry. At some point, they pass through this location. Why would you want to kick them out? But even so, they ended up as an orphaned and abandoned country, without crops, farms, arable land, completely adrift. They lost all hope. They were kicked out of the only country they thought could save them. And in 1965, very much against their will and in a very bad way, Singapore declared its independence. And in those years, by 1969, it became the richest country in Asia. What did this man do in 30 years? That today the country looks like this in just 30 years. For example, in Mexico, we have poverty levels that haven't changed in 30 years. Something that seemed impossible because the inhabitants didn't see themselves as a country. They didn't like each other. They didn't want to be fellow countrymen. They didn't even know each other. They were even missing something that's crucial for a country. One of the pillars of every society, cultural identity. No matter what country you're from, I guarantee you have a very strong cultural identity. Mexican, Colombian, Argentine, Spanish, because there are many elements, achievements, and cultural aspects of your country that give you that patriotic identity. Argentines have Maradona, Mexicans have food, and mariachi, Colombians have cumbia. Each country has that cultural identity that makes you see yourself as different from other countries, with your own accent, slang, influences, and TV shows. There was none of that here. They were temporary workers, strangers to one another, trapped on an island in a filthy camp. Imagine being sent to work in the United States and you're there with other people you don't even know. And you're poor, sick and all that. You're addicted. And suddenly the owner of the ranch has to declare independence. And that's your new country. You'd say, well, I'll just go back to my country. Why should I care about these strangers? But they couldn't, because most of those people were from China and the Chinese government didn't allow those who left the country to return. They had no other choice. And since they didn't have food, Malaysia and Indonesia, the neighboring countries, were sabotaging their imports. They had nowhere to buy food, nothing to eat, no medicine, no houses, no materials, nothing. At this point, Singapore was a very dangerous country, with a very high murder rate and violent internal conflict among all the groups. A very high rate of opium addiction, a very high rate of venereal diseases because of the brothels they had here. For sailors from all over the world who stopped here, it was a very marginalized neighborhood, inhabited by people, most of them in extreme poverty. It had the same standard of living as Latin America. How did they become the most technologically advanced country in 30 years? Now they have a very strong sense of identity and patriotic pride as Singaporeans. They care for each other as fellow countrymen and respect each other.
What more evidence do you want that Singaporeans respect each other? The fact that they don't steal from each other.
From each other. It says there, "Happy birthday, Singapore." How is it that today they have the best infrastructure in the world? I imagine that first they panicked, then felt pressure, desperation, and I guess eventually, since the human spirit is indomitable, they pulled themselves together and resigned themselves. So the people who were here entered a period of emergency and had no choice but to become Singaporeans in order to survive. And the new people next to you, who used to be your enemies, the ones who robbed you, who exploited you, who you fought with, now they are your Singaporean brothers. And you have to build a prosperous country or that's where you'll stay. What we know as win or die, and we've seen it a lot with our fellow countrymen, is that they go to the United States, arrive without knowing the language, without knowing anyone, with $20 in their pocket, and if they don't succeed, they don't make it, they just don't survive. It's either you win or you die. If you don't find a job, you don't eat. Failing is not an option. And that's what happened to the Singaporeans, but as a country, together, not individually. And they put in so much effort, and their state of emergency was so intense that they made it. This was their do or die. If this didn't exist, those who were there at that time would have died. Here you have the raw photograph of what it means to win or die. This is the win. That win or die mindset was thanks to their president, who started as a president and became a dictator. Today, Singapore is a democracy and they don't support any dictator, but they acknowledge that they got to where they are thanks to a dictator. Look at how complicated the history of this country is. They know that all their prosperity began with the arrival of a dictator, and this man got to work. The first thing he did was, Here in Singapore, we are not going to charge import taxes, export taxes, corporate taxes, or sales taxes. So where exactly did they start? Where was that 0 point, that first step? Here, Merito, look, at that time, the humble, modest, shabby port of Singapore. The simplest strategy, no taxes. Come here, ships from all over the world come. Sell, produce, buy, package, pack, assemble. No taxes, no fees, no tariffs, no site fees, no operating fees, nothing. Just come. Yes, it's a bit dirty, but it's free. Come. And so, by not charging taxes, their small and humble port was able to compete against the larger, already established ports in neighboring countries like Bangkok and Jakarta. And companies realized that not only did they not charge a tax for docking at that port, or for selling their goods, packing them and transporting them, the no-tax strategy really gave them a boost, and there won't be any personal taxes either. A worker doesn't pay the government for their right to work. But here's something key. They only tax drugs, tobacco, alcohol, and prostitution. Now compare this system, for example, with that of the United States. An example, if I go to gamble at a native reservation, I don't pay tax. And if I go to buy milk for my children, I pay a tax. That's how they prioritize productivity and ethics. And they discourage vices and addictions. On top of all this, add a strong anti-corruption campaign. Singapore decided we're going to eliminate corruption. Not to hide it, not to disguise it, not to stop reporting it when it happens and hide the statistics to make ourselves look better. No, we're going to eliminate it. Step number 1. They quadrupled the salaries of public officials. They were very well paid. And second, are you ready to hear the second one? Well, death penalty for public officials who participated in corruption. This includes not only accepting bribes, stealing taxpayer money, but also any conflict of interest. Any action taken to benefit me, my associates, or my relatives because of the power I hold. And today the story is well known. Another title for Singapore, one of the least corrupt nations in the world, and this is at all levels of society, not just the government. Starting with the government, of course, but not only them. Non-profit foundations, family businesses, individuals, all productive and honest. And this sums up Singapore for us because Singapore itself is a combination of many strategies that actually worked. Next step, health and education. Because the most important thing for a country's prosperity is that its population is educated. And it's no use having them educated if they're sick or have nowhere to get treatment. Health and education, the next pillars for a developed country. And since they already had a dictatorship, they said, well, let's take advantage of it while we're at it. And like any good dictator, we can force our population to do what we tell them without being questioned or stopped. So they forced their population to save 25% of their income. The employer puts in another 25%. And the government is a dictatorship, but at least they're kind of cool. And they said, I'll put in the other 25%. And that's how they were forced to save for their housing, for their education, and for their retirement. And the government provides health care so they can say, I'm a dictator, but I'm benevolent. So they started building thousands of homes like these here. And most Singaporeans live in neighborhoods like these, in homes like these. If you look, they're not luxurious or flashy, but they did serve their main purpose: to provide a very decent quality of life to every citizen. The plan worked, and that's why Singaporeans today have the highest savings rate on planet Earth. But now, what good are all these things to you? In fact, what good is your home if you don't have a job? And in a country that doesn't have large natural resources, that doesn't have arable land, how do you create jobs? How? From where? Next very important step, create companies. Likewise, a person isn't going to get rich. You won't be financially solvent just by saving money, by not going out to dinner, or by buying the cheapest ticket when you go to the movies. No. You will become a rich man by founding international companies. In the same way, a country doesn't become rich through austerity measures. Of course they help, yes, of course. But that's not everything. Here comes the next step, to consolidate your country as a global economic power. The creation of international companies. Look at all those logos. All those buildings with logos on them belong to Singaporean companies or to companies that have a branch here in Singapore or that are based in Singapore to take advantage of the low rates. And again, the controversial part. Since it's a dictatorship, that benevolent dictator created a law so that Singaporean citizens could buy shares, bonds, and be a part of it. Owners of all these companies that are established in the country at a very low cost. This, by every definition, is communism. They are forcing you to share a percentage of your private company's profits with the general population who don't work at your company or are not shareholders. But look, see the bright side. As a businessman, instead of paying a tax to the government, I would actually prefer to share it with my neighborhood. I mean, if I had to choose. Either way, they're going to take it from you. I'd rather give it to my lazy neighbor than to a corrupt government. So every time a Singaporean company wins, all Singaporeans win. There we have the clearest example, it's Singapore Airlines. When the commercial value of Singaporean airlines rises on the stock market, all Singaporeans win. What better example of a dictatorship that ended up benefiting you in the long run? Wow, that's tough. Eventually, the dictatorship ended and Singapore modernized and transitioned to a transparent democracy with a free press. But they continued with policies and investments that bring prosperity. Some are seen as extreme by the rest of the world. For example, it's the priciest country to own a car. Extremely high taxes to own a vehicle, gas, insurance, parking, tolls for using the highways, fees to enter certain parts of the city, and the most expensive driver's license in the world. And they took all that money from vehicle taxes and invested it in one of the best public transportation systems in the world. With high-quality trains, air-conditioned stations, this public transportation system is efficient, fast, clean, safe, and relatively, considering the cost of living, very cheap, with free internet on all trains. And so, Singapore continued to establish itself as a leading economy in the world, as a developed first world country. And what else do they need? Well, it's one thing to look this awesome, literally just look at the city, futuristic buildings, clean streets, dreamlike roads, such an amazing country, excuse my language so to speak, and some green areas. Just look at these green areas. This is not just any green area. This is like a mix between a park, a theme park, something futuristic, and a museum of everything. Therefore, Singapore taught the world a very important lesson. They show us by example that it doesn't matter how large your population is or how little space you have. They are a city. The whole country is a city, and yet they still have space for green areas. If Singapore has green areas, no other place has an excuse not to have them. Ciudad Mesa. For example, in the state of Mexico, it has fewer people than Singapore, it has more space than Singapore, and it has less than 1% of its green areas. Is it possible that this place with more people and less space has more green areas? Now, the million-dollar question. Can we replicate this economic success, achieve this quality of life without having a dictator? And the short answer is yes, we can learn a lot about Singapore's development. Above all, two things: eliminate corruption and lower taxes. We can't replicate it exactly policy by policy, year by year, right? This process cannot be replicated exactly as it happened here, in any other country on earth, because the circumstances are unique. It was perfect for Singapore, but not for the rest of the world. But we have to find the closest possible way to achieve this success without the dictator.
Look here. I attended this party, which was the celebration of Singapore Day, the day it was established, and I felt envy, a good kind of envy. I also want to be like these Singaporeans, celebrating the success and prosperity of their country together with my fellow countrymen. They don't have to go somewhere else in search of opportunities. Just look at the faces of these Singaporeans watching their flag being raised as a prosperous, developed and safe nation. I want that too.
That's my report for now. May courage be with you. See you next time.